A duplex can collect $3,400 in rent every month and still leave its owner wondering where the money went. That sounds impossible until you stop looking at the mortgage and start looking at the entire property. Imagine you find a $400,000 duplex. You put $80,000 down, borrow $320,000, and rent the two units for $1,700 each. Suddenly, the deal seems obvious. You collect $3,400 a month. Your mortgage might be a little over $2,000. On a spreadsheet, it looks like you have more than $1,000 left every month. But that number is not your profit. It is barely the beginning of the calculation. Before you celebrate, the property has to pay its property taxes. It needs insurance. Someone has to fix the leaking faucet, replace the aging appliance, mow the lawn, and deal with the occasional emergency. Then there is vacancy. Maybe one tenant leaves and the unit sits empty for 6 weeks while you clean it, advertise it, and find someone new. And somewhere in the future, the roof will need replacing, even if it looks perfectly fine today. This is the first mistake new duplex owners make. They confuse rental income with investment return. The experienced investor thinks differently. They start with gross rent, subtract realistic operating expenses, account for vacancy and long-term capital costs, and only then look at what remains after debt service. That distinction matters because a property can produce impressive revenue while generating mediocre cash flow. Worse, a deal can look profitable during an ordinary month and become a financial burden when one expensive repair arrives. So the real question is not, can the rent cover my mortgage? The better question is, after every realistic cost is accounted for, what does this property actually produce? And once you follow every dollar from the tenant's rent check to the owner's bottom line, the economics of the duplex start looking very different. That is where the attractive story gets tested. Because if you cannot explain where the other dollars go, you do not yet understand what you are buying. Now let's follow the money all the way through the property, because this is where a duplex stops being a simple rent versus mortgage calculation and starts looking like a small business. Take our $400,000 duplex producing $3,400 in monthly rent, or $4,800 a year. That $4,800 is called gross potential rental income. It sounds impressive, but you should immediately assume that you will not collect every dollar. Start with vacancy and credit loss. Suppose you reserve 5% of rent for empty units, turnover, and tenants who occasionally pay late or not at all. That removes $2,040 from annual income, leaving $38,760. Now subtract property taxes. Depending on the location, perhaps they cost $4,800 a year. Insurance might add another $1,500. Then come the expenses people love to forget because they are less predictable. Maintenance might average $2,500 a year. Landscaping or snow removal could cost another $1,000. Maybe you pay $600 for utilities that are not separately metered. And eventually, something expensive breaks. A roof does not politely send you a monthly bill. A furnace does not fail on schedule. Appliances do not care whether your cash flow spreadsheet looks perfect. That is why experienced investors maintain a capital expenditure reserve for major items such as roofs, HVAC systems, plumbing, and exterior work. After these operating expenses, what remains is called net operating income, or NOI. NOI tells you what the property itself produces before considering the mortgage. Suppose our example produces roughly $27,000 of NOI after realistic operating expenses. If annual mortgage payments total $25,200, the property might leave only $1,400 a year, or $150 a month, before taxes on your personal income and other owner-specific costs. That is a completely different story from the tenants give me $1,300 every month. The famous 50% rule can be useful as a quick screening tool, but dangerous when treated like a law. It is a shortcut, not a substitute for building your own property-level numbers carefully before making a decision. Real properties have different taxes, insurance costs, ages, utility structures, maintenance requirements, and management needs. A rough rule can tell you whether a deal deserves another look. It cannot tell you whether you should sign the closing documents. Here is the uncomfortable part. Some expenses are invisible precisely because nothing has gone wrong yet. The roof looks fine. The furnace works. Both units are occupied. The tenant pays on time. That does not mean those costs have disappeared. It means you have not been charged for them yet. So before calling a duplex profitable, you need to know its operating economics without the mortgage. But even that is not the full investment story, because the next question is much more personal. How much return are you actually earning on your own money? Now we reach the part of real estate that can make the numbers look almost magical. Leverage return to our $400,000 duplex. Suppose you put $80,000 down and borrow the remaining $320,000. You control a $400,000 asset, but you did not provide all $400,000 yourself. That difference is the entire point of leverage. Imagine the property rises in value by 3% during 1 year. 3% of $400,000 is $12,000. Now compare that with your original $80,000 equity. A $12, zero increase represents 15% of the money you initially put into the property. That is why real estate can produce surprisingly large returns on invested capital. You are participating in the performance of a much larger asset than the cash sitting in your down payment. But there is a catch, and it is massive. Leverage does not only magnify gains, it magnifies losses. If the same $400,000 duplex falls 10% in value, the decline is $40,000. That is half of your original $80,000 equity. But your equity has taken a serious hit. This is why calling leverage free money is dangerous. And this is where we need to separate 3 different ways a duplex can build wealth. First, there is cash flow, the money left after expenses and debt service. Second, there is principal paydown. Every mortgage payment gradually reduces what you owe, increasing your equity even if the property's market value never changes. Third, there is appreciation, the possibility that the property becomes more valuable over time. These engines behave differently. Cash flow can put money in your pocket today. Principal paydown quietly builds ownership. Appreciation can create substantial paper wealth, but it is uncertain. That means a duplex with modest monthly cash flow is not automatically a bad investment. It could still build wealth through debt reduction and appreciation. But the opposite is also true. Strong cash flow does not make excessive leverage safe. The debt creates both the opportunity and the vulnerability. Leverage should be judged by whether your income, reserves, and cash flow can survive the downside without forcing you to sell at the worst possible moment. And there is one situation where leverage becomes even more interesting, because your duplex may not simply be an investment property. It may also reduce your own housing costs. Here is where a duplex can become fundamentally different from a normal rental property. You can live in one unit yourself. Imagine you currently spend $2,000 a month to rent a house or apartment. That money provides housing, but when the month ends, the payment is gone. Now imagine instead buying a duplex, living in one unit, and renting the other for fee $700 a month. You are no longer looking at the property purely as an investment. You are combining 2 financial decisions: where you live and where you deploy your capital. Suppose your total monthly housing costs, including the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and reasonable operating expenses, come to $3,300. The other unit generates $700 in rent. Your effective housing cost becomes roughly $600 before considering vacancy and unexpected expenses. That does not mean the tenant is literally paying your mortgage. That phrase makes the economics sound much simpler than they really are. What is actually happening is more interesting. Someone else is helping subsidize your housing expense while you build equity in a leveraged asset. For a young buyer with stable income and enough reserves, that difference can be powerful. But there is a price beyond dollars. You are becoming a landlord while living next door to your tenant. The tenant's late-night maintenance problem can become your problem. A vacancy affects your finances. A difficult tenant can affect your daily life. And the privacy you would have in a single-family home may be replaced by shared walls, shared property, or simply the awareness that part of your home is also a business. This creates an important contrast. A spreadsheet might tell you that the duplex produces an excellent return. Your actual life might tell you that you hate managing tenants. Neither answer is wrong. They are answering different questions. The best investment is not necessarily the one with the highest theoretical return. It is the one whose financial demands and operational responsibilities you can realistically handle for years. And there is another detail many first-time buyers overlook. The tenant is not just a source of rental income. That person is part of the risk profile of your investment, because the moment that second unit becomes vacant, the beautiful monthly calculation can change very quickly. A duplex can look profitable when both units are occupied, but occupancy is not permanent, and treating it that way is one of the fastest ways to underestimate risk. Imagine your rental unit brings in $700 every month. You build your budget around that number. Then the tenant moves out. The unit sits empty for 2 months while you clean it, make repairs, advertise it, and search for another tenant. You have suddenly lost $3,400 of expected rent, and you may have spent another $1,000 preparing the unit. That is why vacancy belongs in the math before buying. The same principle applies to maintenance. A tenant might live in the unit for 3 years without causing a major problem. Then an appliance fails, plumbing needs work, or the heating system suddenly needs attention. None of those events care about your monthly cash flow. This is where conservative underwriting matters. Instead of asking, how much money do I make if everything goes right? Ask, what happens if something goes wrong? Build 3 scenarios. In the base case, both units stay occupied, expenses remain close to expectations, and the property generates the cash flow you projected. In a moderate stress case, one unit is vacant for 2 months, a few repairs appear, and expenses rise. Then consider a bad year. Vacancy arrives at the same time as a major repair. A property that produces $300 a month in your perfect scenario can quickly become negative when reality interrupts the spreadsheet. That does not automatically make it bad. It means you need enough reserves and margin to survive uncertainty without being forced into a desperate decision. Tenant quality matters, but no tenant eliminates risk. The goal is to build a property whose economics remain reasonable when turnover, vacancies, and ordinary problems occur. The investor who plans only for perfect occupancy is not analyzing risk. They are analyzing a fantasy, and even with strong tenants, reserves, and conservative planning, there is a way to destroy a good deal. Paying too much for the property itself. A great duplex can still be a terrible investment if you pay the wrong price for it. That sounds obvious, but in a competitive market, buyers often focus so heavily on finding a property they like that they stop asking whether the numbers justify what the seller wants. Consider 2 nearly identical duplexes. Both generate $4,800 in annual rent. One costs $350,000. The other costs $450,000. The rental income is identical, but the economics are not. The more expensive property requires more capital, usually carries a larger mortgage, and gives you less income relative to the amount you paid for the asset. The building did not become 29% more productive simply because its price increased by $100,000. This is why investors use metrics such as the capitalization rate, or cap rate. At its simplest, cap rate is the property's net operating income divided by its value. If a property generates $27,000 of NOI and costs $350,000, the cap rate is about 7.7%. At $450,000, that same $27,000 of NOI produces a cap rate of only 6%. Same building, completely different investment, and notice what the calculation does. It evaluates the property before your specific mortgage enters the picture. That matters because financing can change, while the underlying property economics should still make sense. This is also where optimistic assumptions become dangerous. Maybe you tell yourself rents will definitely increase. Maybe the neighborhood will appreciate rapidly. Maybe interest rates will fall and you will refinance. Maybe you can renovate the property and immediately raise rents. Any of those things could happen. But none should be treated as guaranteed income. A disciplined investor separates facts from assumptions. Current rent is a fact. Expected rent growth is an assumption. Existing taxes are measurable. Future appreciation is uncertain. A planned renovation can be estimated. The return you hope that renovation creates still has to be tested. Sometimes the smartest move is not negotiating harder or finding another financing trick. It is simply walking away, because when you overpay, future appreciation has to rescue your decision before the investment can look attractive. And once you understand that purchase price sets the foundation for the entire deal, the next question becomes much bigger. What can this duplex actually do for your wealth over 10 years? A duplex can look unimpressive when you judge it 1 month at a time. Maybe the property produces only a few $100s of cash flow after expenses. But real estate is often a long-duration investment, and several different wealth-building mechanisms can operate simultaneously. Go back to our $400,000 duplex. You put $80,000 down and finance the rest. Over 10 years, imagine the property produces modest positive cash flow, while your mortgage balance gradually falls. Every principal payment increases your ownership stake, even if the property's market value never moves. Now add appreciation. If the property appreciates at an average of 3% annually, a $400,000 property could be worth roughly $538,000 after 10 years. That is about $138,000 of potential appreciation. But appreciation is not guaranteed, and markets do not move in a straight line. Some years can be flat, others can be negative. Then consider rent growth. If rents rise over time while your original mortgage payment remains largely fixed, the relationship between income and debt service can improve. A property that feels tight in year 1 may have significantly stronger cash flow later. But there is another side to this equation. Costs, property taxes can rise. Insurance can become more expensive. Major repairs can consume years of accumulated cash flow. Selling the property creates transaction costs. And if you invested $80,000 here, that money cannot simultaneously be invested somewhere else. That is opportunity cost. So instead of asking, how much cash did this duplex give me this month? Look at the broader wealth equation. Cash flow is one engine. Principal paydown is another. Appreciation is a third. Potential rent growth can strengthen the fourth. But maintenance, taxes, insurance, selling costs, vacancy, and opportunity costs push in the opposite direction. This is why two investors can look at the same duplex and reach completely different conclusions. One may focus on today's cash flow and decide it is mediocre. Another may evaluate the entire 10-year picture and decide the combination of housing savings, equity growth, and potential appreciation justifies the investment. Neither perspective is automatically correct. The real test is whether the long-term return is attractive enough for the risk, capital, and work required. And that brings us to the final question. After everything we've calculated, who should actually own a duplex and who should walk away? That decision matters more than any advertised rental yield today. After all the spreadsheets, rent estimates, mortgage calculations, and worst-case scenarios, the final question is surprisingly simple. Does owning a duplex actually fit your financial life? Consider two buyers looking at the exact same property. Buyer A has stable income, a healthy emergency reserve, understands that vacancies and repairs are inevitable, and plans to hold the property for years. They do not need the duplex to produce spectacular cash flow every month. They are comfortable managing tenants, and they have calculated the deal using conservative assumptions. For that buyer, a duplex could be a powerful combination of housing and investing. Now consider buyer B. They have very little cash left after the down payment. Their entire investment depends on both units staying occupied. They assume rents will rise quickly, repairs will be minimal, and appreciation will bail them out if the numbers get tight. They also dislike dealing with tenants. The property has not changed, the buyer has. That is the lesson most real estate discussions miss. A duplex is not automatically a good investment simply because it generates rental income. Its quality depends on the price, financing, expenses, reserves, location, expected income, and the person taking the risk. Before making an offer, calculate the gross rental income, realistic vacancy, operating expenses, NOI, debt service, monthly cash flow, total cash invested, and expected return. Then stress test the property. What happens if one unit sits empty for 2 months? What happens if a major repair arrives at the same time? What happens if appreciation is zero for several years? And finally, compare the opportunity cost. Ask what your capital could potentially do elsewhere. The most important question is not, can I afford this duplex? It is, does this duplex deserve my capital? If the answer only works when every assumption goes perfectly, you are not looking at a strong investment. You are looking at a fragile one. But if the numbers remain reasonable under conservative assumptions, you have something much more valuable than a promising listing. You have a property whose economics can withstand reality. That is the real advantage of understanding duplex economics. You stop buying based on hope and start making decisions based on numbers, risk, and the life you actually want.